Hello everyone, this is Alice at Welldoing, and today I'm talking to Nick Goldsmith, who is the author of Rewild Your Mind. So nice to meet you, Nick, and we're here today to talk about your past experiences, what led you to write the book. So my understanding is that it's an experience of PTSD that really kind of started you on your healing journey.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. You're absolutely right. It was very much my own journey which has inspired the book and subsequently the way I live my life now.
No. And do you mind telling us a bit about the experiences that led to that time of your life?
I then went and joined Her Majesty's, at the time, Her Majesty's Royal Marine Commandos. Trained very hard for it, was very fortunate and worked hard to get through everything in one go. Became a Royal Marine Commando, served for 11 years. Service was brought short through diagnosis and subsequent medical discharge. In 2007, I undertook training. 2008, I passed out, was fortunate with a green beret on my head. It takes 9 months to become a Royal Marine Commando. From the 67 that started commando training, there were 11 of us left at the end after a year-long sift of trying to get that 67 together. That's kind of how things were at the time. And if we cast our minds back, it was a highly industrious period for British Armed Forces as we were entrenched in the war in Afghanistan, and we also had elements, things were happening in Iraq. So people like myself were out the door year upon year, and myself in particular, having chosen that particular line of work or employment or unit, meant that I started with a 4-5 commando. So up in Scotland, in Arbroath, we were based up there, and I did my first tour in 2008. So as soon as I came out of training, pretty much straight out the door within a few months, and it deeply affected me. It was pretty much around the height of the fighting, some of the worst fighting seen for years, and we were expected to on a daily basis. We were fixing bayonets. Danger close artillery, all manner of things were taking place. It was pretty hairy and highly kinetic stuff. So it wasn't uncommon to be bumping into people at nearly point blank ranges in the corn. As I said, lots of visceral trauma and lots of near misses, etc. So during that first tour, I also incurred many times where I thought I was going to lose my life, or I did actually see colleagues of mine wounded or hit in front of me. All of this had a profound effect on the young 21-year-old myself, and that's without the casualties of war, people who are caught in the crossfire, and the whole host of horrendous human behavior that comes about from warfare, war-torn countries. There's the humanitarian side of things, which is just failing badly. There's people exploiting that situation. It's just absolute chaos. And I think that as highly trained and as well prepared, both physically and mentally, as we were as a sort of battle group, as commandos, staying in touch with a lot of the boys now, to a man, I think we've all come away affected in one way, shape, or another from that particular time period. Mm-hmm. So we've all had our own journeys. We've all kind of taken different, kind of paths. And for me, my journey towards heading back to that rural upbringing in East Sussex kind of started around then, and that's where the sort of rewilding thing was acting as initially as a crutch. And holding me together as I went on to conduct a further 5 more operational deployments. I would be out of the country up to 9 months of the year at times. And just the way that my career kind of flowed, I ended up working alongside a British Special Forces unit. So then intensity ramped up again, albeit in a sort of initially in a supporting role. That's kind of how that all took place. And then from there, things just got quicker, faster, harder.
Yeah.
And the burnout was inevitable. Unfortunately, because life is life, there were a few bits that happened in between the tours, namely a freak accident with a young lady who severed a femoral artery in a pub toilet, a shard of mirror, basically. A mirror had broken and this had taken place. I was in the right place at the wrong time. Now, my reason for being there was as a result of my drinking, trying to forget the stuff from the first tour. So you could argue that kind of that was a good thing, not good thing. You know, I've had many years to try and work all this stuff out and go through it in therapy. By the time I arrived in that sort of toilet to deal with the scene in front of me, there was literally blood spurting up the wall, hitting the ceiling. It was pretty visceral, very nasty stuff. She was panicking. She was on the floor. It was all pooling around her. And you get that horrid, sweet, kind of sickly, iron-filled smell of blood, and it was coagulating on the white, cold tiles of this toilet floor, and it's just like a big gelatinous mess, very dark red, but it was coming out bright red. I got a face full of it. I ended up absolutely covered in it as I tried to stem that bleed. For 19 minutes it took until the ambulance arrived, at which point I had done my very best to keep her in the game. I'd elevated the leg, I'd shielded her from it. I told her it really wasn't that bad. I'd done all of the handover on the net, on somebody's mobile phone to the paramedics. Bizarrely, at the time, I was completely au fait, completely comfortable with the chaos I was in. And although I only have snippets of memory, we've actually had this conversation this year between her and I, where we've been able to do that collective memory thing, which was really quite lovely. And there are only 3 tiny nuances that my version and her version aren't quite. But then I suppose it's tricky when your heart's doing, somersaults and you're trying to kind of deal with, from my perspective, thinking, oh God, I'm going to lose her here because she's white as a sheet and hypervolemic shock is taking place. And I found myself in a position where, do I let go of the double thumb pressure that I've created, trapping the artery against the bone just below the wound, to backhand her across the face because I'm shouting and that's starting to fail on me because I could see her just going. It was utterly terrifying in that moment. So that took place between the tours. And then I went on to do some more sensitive work overseas, slightly different role to conventional soldiering. And while I was away doing that stuff, I hadn't had any communication with home for several weeks. I'm not sure if people actually knew where my last known location was, but the point is a message finally got through to me. And it was my mother. And she was saying to me that she just had a diagnosis of, I believe it was stage 3 it was cancer in breasts. So she had to have some invasive surgery followed by full radio and chemo. Now, I was brought back to the UK. We then went through that process with her. Watching her lose her hair as a proud Parisian woman was rough. Went through that whole process with her. And then I'm trying to think now, I came back. So the week I got back to work and the sort of, during that time she was going through chemo, I had to use the military welfare system in order to protect me from being deployed constantly again. And so the moment that sort of protection bubble was lifted, so upon the week of her receiving the news that she was in remission, bang, 7 months, Afghanistan, redeployed again with no R&R. The straw that broke the camel's back. So I returned with this enormous handlebar moustache. My hair was out here and just the 1,000-yard stare, all the classic sort of symptoms of someone who is completely done. I no longer recognized rank. I was just in my own little world. It was in a very, very bad way. So fortunately or unfortunately, on that tour, we had a series of events that impacted our very small location in the mountains. One of which was we lost a few chaps, and it was pretty bad. And a naval psych nurse was forward mounted to our location, and we all had to have a mandatory conversation with her. And it was during that, in that kind of interview conversation, however you want to look at it, that I was highlighted as struggling. The agreement was, and we're talking nothing more than a sort of pinky promise, that when I return to the UK, I'll hand my weapons back into the armory, and then I'll stay on the base and have a meeting with her before going on leave, just as a follow-up. During that follow-up, she asked me something like 3 questions, and I just fell apart. Absolutely inconsolable crying. So I was signed off, sent on leave. Their case conference took place without me. I was that unwell. And I think at this point, I was probably sat at home in the dark without the TV on most days, just absolutely done towards the very end of it. The only thing that the consistent and constant that had kept me going all the way throughout the kind of tours, and, you know, as well as the incredible support of my wife, or now my wife, Louise, was having a little place to go, a little patch of Somerset, to call my own. Now, I realized that I'm extremely fortunate. A lot of chaps need a shed, men's shed, or a place to go, or some, you know, a bit of headspace, or a certain place you can go to every single day to get that. And I had a woodland. Well, it wasn't a very big woodland, just to put this into context, and it was kind of pokey and on a slope, and no one else wanted it, and it was up for about £6,000 initially, I think. And we fought tooth and claw to get it, and I'd just come back from a tour, so we had enough to be able to secure that. And quite quickly, that became my go-to place. That became my church. That became my escape, you know. And I'd just go down there and clear paths and sit around the campfire and ask myself the really deep questions. And I've openly said several occasions, albeit at the bottom of a bottle of rum sometimes, you know, I was still really struggling to cope. Not just with adjustment, but with all of the intrusive thoughts, memories, sounds, being triggered by just about everything all the time, and just the feeling of not being able to cope with everyday life. Being able to cope in complete chaos, fine. Being able to cope with someone cutting me up at a roundabout, I could be angry for days. You know, it was awful looking back. So the environment, I believe that the environment is super key to us as humans. If you place the person in the right, like, you don't put a poorly fish in dirty water. If you put that human in the right, clean environment, which arguably for 300,000 years, the great outdoors is where we've come from. You know, it's the reason we produce oils and you have hair under your armpit. It's the kind of the best place. So if you can get that bit right, and then you can, you know, have those conversations with a few trusted people around you, whose version of reality you trust at a time when you don't trust your own. And it doesn't have to be family, it could be a friend. And in fact, we choose our friends, not our family, in this life. So something like that can be so powerful. Just a conversation around a campfire. It doesn't even have to be a campfire. Let's face it. When we go to a restaurant, they stick a candle in the middle. What's that all about? It's because it sort of hacks straight into that primal part of you. That little flame, it represents safety. You know, because fire gives us the ability to purify water. It gives us, we can cook our food. It gives us light. We can ward off predators. There's not much we can't do without fire, you know. So just so much as having a candle on a table and a conversation can be a powerful thing. And that's the sort of thing I've written about in the book.
That's excellent. I'm wondering what it was like to be discharged, because I mean, such a massive part of your identity, but it must have been a relief as well.
At the time, it was huge. It was a really, really strange period of time. I mean, it got a bit worse before it got a bit better, I'm afraid to say. The crux of it were, the case conference took place and I was due to start in a Naval Recovery Service Centre, effective immediate. For whatever reason, between the two bases, between this very high speed place here and the recovery centre, I think both of them thought that I was under the other's care until they were waiting on a final email. Whatever happened, 8 months later, I was at home, still on leave, at my very lowest point, classically, it was towards the end of December. It was 1 week before Christmas leave, and I picked up the phone to the one person that I trusted in this world at that time, which was that psych nurse. So I rang her number, to which she answered, and there was a flurry of emails and, oh God, I'm so sorry, and please answer the phone in 1 minute if I call you again. And there was a whole, and I think she could pretty much hear that at that point I was at that point where it was like, flip a coin. If she answers, great, I'll invest in myself a bit further and we'll see where this goes. And if she doesn't, I'm out, I'm done. I was literally at that point. So things took place, things happened, and I was sort of invited in down to this recovery centre, which was a huge thing because it meant not having to wear a uniform, but having to go down onto the base again. That was hard. And the process began, and I would end up there for 4 years until they were able to sort of release me, which kind of is also quite telling of how far down the rabbit hole I was at that point.
And was therapy part of that?
Absolutely. My typical days would have started at the recovery centre in a big double room. They call it the Z type accommodation, so it's got its own little ensuite. Think like a Premier Lodge room, like a hotel room, to yourself, which in the military is awesome because you don't get that unless you've got through the ranks. And having to turn to, so appear every morning for the register at a sort of 8:30 at a huge gymnasium, multi-complex place with all the latest machines and gadgets and physios, and suddenly all these people are assigned to you to try and help you. And I've met some people that have gone on to be quite, lifelong friends, I'd say. One of them being Mr. Mark Jones of 360 Rehab, who we're now edging towards working with to help rehab other veterans. But at the time, he was in the Royal Navy and he was a chief petty officer, and he was assigned to me as a physiotherapist. So that's how we met initially. And all of the physical injuries that I had from not just drinking, but I was overtraining. I was training myself to oblivion. Exercise is healthy. Exercise to failure with no end continually. Yes, you might be a beast, but you're not doing yourself any favors. You're absolutely frying your nervous system. So it was about trying to get me to slow down enough that they could actually work on me, and then for me to relearn healthy relationship with myself or surrounding training. And it's something I still have to monitor now because I could easily just get back into the zone. So it's that kind of thing. And again, working in the woods was ticking that box. It was good, hard manual labor, creating paths and building steps and literally carving out of this piece of landscape what is today a thriving business and has gone on to help hundreds of people. I'm so proud of what we've done. It's great to finally be able to look back and go, wow, that was pretty crazy. But yeah.
So what kind of people do you see coming to you then?
Injured armed forces veterans and emergency service personnel. We started something else called the Woodland Warrior Program. So you've got a limited company and a CIC, a community interest company, and they kind of work hand in hand. They share resources and a site. So we started focusing on essentially the crux of what had helped me, and developed this course or this program, because it's not just don't just turn up in the woods and someone waves a magic wand. It takes time, and people continue to use the program as a handrail whilst they go on to other sort of therapies and whatever else they need. And it's been hugely successful, and we continue to see growth with it. And in fact, this year there's some exciting announcements coming up. So I'm just over the moon that the bottom line behind all of this is I chose to invest in myself in an environment where I felt safe and comfortable, and with the right help around me of those key couple of people, to prop me up every time I stumbled or fell, because it's not a straightforward journey. It's not a fairy tale. There are many times where you metaphorically just tread on a garden rake and get smacked in the face by life. It can be done. You can turn it around from the absolute brink of not wanting to be here anymore. So if anyone's watching this today, it can be done. I'm telling you now. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Nick. I mean, I wonder, I was wondering about so people who don't have easy access to outdoor spaces, maybe they live in a city or they have limited mobility, things like that. What are your kind of tips for people like that to bring it into daily life somehow?
Okay, so I mean, essentially part of the reason I wrote Rewild Your Mind was to reach people who are maybe living in a 20-story tower block in London somewhere, or who don't have easy physical access to the outdoors. Just remember, there's many ways to skin a cat. So you can get a friend to go and collect some items for you and bring the outdoors indoors and start to place these around your home. And I'm just literally thinking about my home now. Almost every single windowsill is adorned with something. We've got Corsican pine cones with that sort of frosted look on them. We've got pebbles and things from the beach. There's shells in the toilet. There's everywhere you look. I think even the wallpaper behind me is absolutely covered in some sort of vintage chateau plants or something. I didn't choose that. It's everywhere you look. There's always earthy tones, and our connection to nature. Again, going back to remember, this is something that we did for a very, very long time. Is innate, and the word biophilia comes from that. It's our innate fascination with wanting to be outdoors or feel that draw to go out there. And of course, not everybody can do, but you can bring the outdoors indoors. I quite often, and I'm normally carrying a pebble in my pocket.
Yes.
I'm actually not right now because I've changed my trousers.
A soothing thing.
Yeah, almost like a worry bead, and I've constantly got it in my hand. And sometimes when I'm talking to someone around the campfire, and so let's say we reach that point of trust where somebody's going to share something or starts to offload something, there can always be that slight worry that person begins to get faster and harder, and that whole story comes out in one great big blurb, And sometimes a nice way to break it up is to just hold out your hand with a pebble, and they'll naturally go, and then just place it in there, and then let them stare at that for a minute and go, sorry, carry on. And they're like, what's just happened? Anyway, so it's called a transferable object. It's like a tool that we can use when we're talking to someone. And at the end of their chat, where they kind of feel enlightened and that they've lightened their load and they've shared something, and however you choose to respond, because sometimes it doesn't need a response, you just need to listen. You say, that's for you. That's your pebble now. You carry that in your pocket. And it seems to work really rather well. Now, the only caveat to that, I would say, with the transferable pebble technique, is when we place so much onus on that pebble, and it's usually around the subject of grief if you lost someone, as long as you don't start to see that pebble as that's your granddad that you lost, because inevitably at some point the pebble will try and disappear in the washing machine or find its way into another pair of trousers. I just demonstrated, I haven't got it on me right now. You get the joy of going to find another one. And I generally believe we are hardwired to find smooth, symmetrical, lovely pebble. Like if you just look down on somebody's driveway, if it's covered in that sort of stone, or if you're a day out on the beach or whatever, you'll always pick out it just calls to you, right? And I think that goes back to like the early days where we needed these things as projectiles for hunting or for tools or for crafts or for, flint knapping. I think we have that wired into us. We're drawn to it.
I love that. Thank you so much, Nick. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. You have the book on you, I think, so maybe you could show it up to everyone. A bit higher. There you go. Perfect. Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure. Best of luck with it.